And I also have an appointment in the University of Delaware Research Office. And that I'm going to be talking to you about what is still an evolving situation. So basically, that there is an evolving situation related to how foreign collaborations are treated by NIH legally. And that it is important to know, one, it's an evolving situation. Everything that I tell you today may change within the next 2 months, but also to be aware that it is an issue that you do need to consider as you move forward. So let me see if I can get my screen. Let's see, Windows, here we go. And then if I do this, I believe everybody's seeing the slides okay? Are the slides okay, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. See.
Okay, cool. I don't use Teams very much, so I just wanted to make sure. All right, so NIH has a long-standing policy about a topic they call foreign components in a research project. And what a foreign component is a performance of any significant scientific element of a project outside of the United States, either by the recipient of the grant, in other words, you go and do research in a foreign country, or by a researcher employed by a foreign organization that is a collaborator on the project. The most important part of this policy is foreign components exist even if no NIH grant funding is expended at the foreign site or with the foreign collaborator. And this is a very, very broad definition, including research involving human subjects or animals foreignly, extensive foreign travel, which is, of course, in the eye of the beholder, if you might impact U.S. foreign policy. But the most important thing that the vast majority of us may deal with is related to that we have collaborations with investigators at a foreign site that are anticipated to result in co-authorship. And this happens very, very frequently in biomedical research. For instance, I'll give you a couple examples from myself. You're working on a model and of a rare human disease, and the clinician who sees the vast majority of patients in France has very detailed clinical phenotyping of people with this disease, and you want to compare the animal model with the human disease phenotype. The human work is all done in France under French regulations. The animal work is all done in the US under US regulations. And you're simply bringing the data together in a single publication as a compare and contrast at the level of writing. Even though no grant funds are expended, that is considered a foreign component because the resulting paper, which is going to be acknowledging U.S. federal funding, will have an author with a foreign affiliation. And this is a rule that has been in place since about 2003. However, that the key piece here is that that it is a may, that it always said in the regulations that co-authorship may constitute a foreign component, and that was always interpreted very liberally. So my situation that I just described with my French collaborator would not have been considered a foreign component 5 years ago. However, under the current emphasis on very, very tight accountability and very tight oversight, particularly of foreign relationships in science, that may is essentially now being interpreted as will. So if you're going to publish a paper that acknowledges NIH funding and has somebody who has a foreign affiliation, that is considered a foreign component. Now, something that changed drastically last year is that foreign components with grant fund expenditures outside of the United States are generally not allowed for any NIH grant mechanism. Our awards, you can no longer set up foreign subcontracts, and IDEA awards always had the rule that no grant dollars may flow to a non-US entity. And honestly, for IDEA mechanisms, no grant funds can flow to a non-IDEA state. So if you're funded by an IDEA mechanism, CTR, INBRE, or a COBRE, you cannot set up a subcontract even with somebody in Maryland. Now, and so in that situation, if you have a research project where you want to collaborate with a foreign entity from the beginning at the level of grant submission, you cannot set it up as a foreign subcontract, particularly for our awards. There is one mechanism that allows for those collaborations that was first put into place in late 2025. That is called the PF5 UF5 mechanism. These are not subcontracts, that there is an application placed that is for two linked grants, a PF5 to the domestic entity, a UF5 to a foreign entity. Now, this distinction is very, very important. Subcontracts are overseen by the primary grantee, so that the subcontract does not have to have the same levels of site as the parent grant. Since these PF5, UF5 grants require the foreign recipient to be considered as a primary grant recipient, they are must maintain the same compliance and accounting structure as the US one, including all certifications. This is a huge burden on the foreign recipient because they have to set up the entire accountability structure that is set up within the United States of any NIH grantee. And I went to a webinar a couple weeks ago from a Irish organization who is able to accept these UF5 grants. And the research office people there basically say that this is a very high level investment. It requires such a high burden of investment that the vast majority of foreign institutions will not be able to accept UF5 awards because they can never meet the auditing and compliance guidelines of the federal government. They have their own accounting and compliance guidelines within their country, but to do all of the US ones on top of it, the vast majority of foreign institutions will not be able to apply for UF5s. So this is very much restricting your ability to have funded collaborations with foreign entities. So I'm going to, and just keep in mind that foreign subcontracts are never allowed under the current rules. However, I personally, in 40 years of doing science, have never had a funded foreign collaboration. However, I have published extensively with scientists in other countries on non-funded foreign collaborations where my foreign collaborator funded their part of the work through their funding mechanisms, my part of the work through NIH mechanisms. And for NIH currently, those are still considered foreign components. They are non-funded foreign components. Now, even if not a single penny of NIH funds ever leave the United States, these to collaborate with a foreign affiliated investigator requires pre-approval by NIH. And that this pre-approval should be sought when the decision to collaborate occurs. So you're at a conference and you realize that somebody in another country has a data set that you guys should be collaborating with for publication. The second you are deciding to collaborate, you must file pre-approval through the NIH pre-approval module. Now, in some cases, people sometimes it just doesn't occur to them. And the collaboration has been moving forward. The second that you are made aware that a paper that acknowledges your NIH grant may result with a foreign bylined author, you must seek pre-approval immediately. And it's really important to say that no paper with a foreign affiliated author that cites an NIH grant may be submitted without NIH approval. Now, this can be very, very broad. Some situations that have come up is a postdoc working in an NIH-funded lab did all of the work in the United States. They then got a job in another country and continued to work on the paper. Under sort of traditional circumstances, that paper would have the affiliation where that person is currently working. If that foreign byline is put on the resulting paper, pre-approval must be sought, even if all of the actual scientific research occurred in the United States. The trigger is that a affiliation of a single author on the paper is foreign, and it doesn't matter why that is setting up that way. Okay. Now, how do you have to handle this? If you are the grant principal investigator, for instance, let's say it's your R21 or your KO1, you have to work with your Office of Sponsored Programs to submit a pre-approval request, and that goes in through the NIH pre-approval module. That is something you do not have access to as an investigator. It is only your institutional signing official can interact with that system. Now, exactly what is required to be submitted for pre-approval is a moving target currently, but a recent submission out of the University of Delaware had the following structure. You have to justify why there is a foreign collaboration. So it's their name, phone number, and email address, the name and address of the foreign site, the estimated total cost of the foreign component site, if any, for each year. You have to say that no part of the NIH award will be used for work performed at the foreign site. It is not allowed to send any NIH funds outside, but you still have to explicitly address and state that no foreign funds go to the foreign site. You have to give a narrative that just describes the description of the work that is performed at the foreign site, whether human subjects are involved. This can be a little tricky because generally it's a lot easier to get this approved if no human or animal subjects are involved. However, sometimes you can't avoid it, such as my situation where my clinical collaborator was in France. She did all the work with the human subjects, but she had French government approval. That's where you'd say that the human work is all being done at the foreign site under the regulatory framework of the foreign site. That are you going to impact U.S. foreign policy? Hopefully not. If it does, then the approval is going to be very long and may not happen. Is the collaboration going to co-authorship? Yes, that's why you're doing this form. Is there a receipt of financial support or resources from a foreign entity? That one can be tricky. Basically, NIH is skeptical of funds coming into the United States from a foreign site. Now, it is more complicated if the grant in question is an idea grant. In other words, an NIMBRE, a COBRE, or a CTR. If you have any foreign connections that have any possibility in a foreign co-authored paper through any mechanism, please immediately contact the principal investigator of the IDEA funding mechanism in question. And the first thing you would do is work with them to determine whether the IDEA grant in question should be acknowledged. NIH program is really backing away of the need to cite every single time that a research project has benefited from IDEA support. That said, if you have an NIMBRE or CTR pilot grant, research project, a COBRE, RPL, or pilot grant, it will likely require that the grant be acknowledged in the publication, and prior approval will need to be sought. However, if the connection is that you used an NIMBRE, CTR, COBRE funded core facility, or you worked with an NIMBRE summer scholar that co-authors the paper, that may not result in a requirement to acknowledge the IDEA grant. And you have to work that out with the IDEA principal investigator. If the work must be acknowledged, you have to work with the IDEA PI before the paper is submitted for publication to obtain prior approval. And such prior approval must be received from NIH before the paper is submitted for publication. It is crucial to do these prior approval requests as early as possible. It will likely take time. The final approver of such prior approval requests is the U.S. State Department. It is not NIH. So it is super, super important that you seek these prior approvals. If a paper shows up in PubMed with a foreign co-author, an IDEA grant being acknowledged, and prior approval has not been sought, it places the IDEA grant in significant peril of having its funding rescinded. So please work with us to try to keep our NIH grants funded going forward by not having non-compliant papers with foreign co-authors hit PubMed when it's too late to seek prior approval. Now, once the prior approval is obtained, any publications may be submitted for publication. And however, the acknowledgement section of that paper must contain a statement that no NIH grant funds were sent to the foreign research site. And you can make that more specific. Like if your collaborator is in France, no NIH grant funds were sent to the French researchers or something like that. Basically, there is very high scrutiny, particularly among certain members of Congress, that they do not want to see U.S. funds being sent to foreign sites. A foreign co-authored paper that acknowledges NIH grant funds is considered evidence that NIH funding could have been sent outside of the United States. So by putting an explicit statement in your paper, it essentially is trying to head off any sort of tweet from certain congressional staffers saying that NIH fund or federal funding is being sent out the United States, outside of the United States illegally. Now, the final takeaways here is that NIH is currently very serious about tracking all interactions between NIH-funded scientists and foreign collaborators. Yes, this includes Canada, their foreign country. The failure to report such interactions can compromise further NIH funding. Now, something that I would like to emphasize, though, that NIH is still formulating the details of these policies. For IDEA mechanisms, the rules have changed dramatically at least 4 different times since December of 2025. The policy statements that I'm giving you today were first put into place 2 weeks ago, and I have then also added further elaborations made by NIH staff at the NISBRE meeting that ended at 4 p.m. yesterday. And be aware that further policy changes may arise on short notice, so make sure that you get the most recent information if you have a collaboration with somebody with a foreign byline and you plan on publishing with them. And keep in mind that that foreign byline may happen after the collaboration is started. Maybe it was a graduate student who has now moved to a postdoc in Canada. Maybe it is a researcher who is working in the United States as an assistant professor who takes a new job in New Zealand. These are all situations that have happened, all of which still require prior approval. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I can open the field to any questions.